everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a lamb stew with some pumpkin mini loaves with little pumpkin seeds on the top. And then we're going to make some, I will make some without pumpkin seeds on the top because my husband does not like them that way. And then we will make some pastrami sourdough melts. So let's start by heating up our oil, and we're going to cube up our lamb and start sauteing it for our stew. And then we're going to pull it out and we'll saute up our veggies and whatnot. So I'm going to start warming up my Dutch oven over medium heat. And then since again, we're making a stew and not a roast, I'm going to trim off this fat on my lamb just so I don't have really rubbery pieces of meat. When you roast it, the fat will like render down and give you just delicious, flavor and texture to your stew. But when you're just going to do a pan fry on it, we're going to just take this off. And there is quite a big thing because the way they do it is when you buy this from like Costco, you're going to have it like the fat wrapped around the outside of your meat. And it's tied up in a netting so that when you cook it up, you have all that kind of fat going there. But we don't want this fat in our stew. Here we go. Let's see, and that was a big chunk of fat. Now we've got pretty much just some meat left. I'm going to cut cube it up. I've got about 1.5 pounds here of lamb. And we're just going to do a small little cube so that it will cook up nicely and just kind of be wonderful in our stew. So last night we did a little bit something different. Last night I kind of sauteed up my lamb, and then we did a balsamic cream sauce with the other portion of this roast. And had it with some Halloween themed ravioli. But these two dishes will have very different flavors to them. And it's just kind of a great way to use the same protein, but in two different recipes that are very different in both like the style of how you're eating it and in the flavor profiles. Here we go. And I find that's like, since I do a lot of shopping at Costco, mainly because we are a big family, but even some of the Costco portions are too big for our large family. So I always divide it up, and I'll freeze some of it down, or I'll just find ways to cook them very differently. That way you can use it up.
Did you have a question? You ever prepare a nice leg of lamb roast?
I do. At Easter, I do a couple variations of lamb. So I'll do a leg of lamb roast as well as lamb lollies. And then I also do lamb chops. So I typically do that around Easter because it just kind of fits with it. And it is lovely. Although I will say my kids absolutely love lamb lollies, but they are definitely more expensive of the cuts of meat for it. But a lot of times, especially I'm doing a stew now because I don't want to spend the time to do a roast on it. But a lot of times I will do like a lamb roast in the winter. I do a lot more roast once it gets a bit more cold outside. Same with stews and stuff like that. Okay, we've almost got these all cubed up here. Here we go. And then my oil should be nice and hot that I should be able to pop these in there, and we'll just sear them off. That way we can cook our little onion bits in the nice kind of lamb drippings. Okay. Yep, that should be hot. So we're going to pop these in, and we're going to let them start to saute up for our stew. And then I'll season them as well. There we go. And I'm going to go wash my hands because we are done with our meats. Okay, while we are waiting for that to saute up, I'm going to get a spoon ready, but we'll start working on our pumpkin loaf. But let's season the top of it first. So we're going to sprinkle a little bit of black pepper over the top. about a teaspoon. And then I've got some rosemary. We're going to use about, I want to say around a teaspoon, because the residual bits of the spices will go into our, like our stew. And then I have some sage. So we're doing rosemary and sage as the flavors for this. And so we're going to sprinkle in about a teaspoon of sage. And then, of course, a little bit of garlic salt because I like to make sure it's nice and seasoned. So about a teaspoon, teaspoon and a half of garlic salt. I'm not going to stir them in yet. Once they have cooked halfway through, that I'll mix them up and kind of do it. But while we're waiting, let's start making our pumpkin loaves. So we're doing mini loaves because mini loaves bake up much faster and they stay more moist. So I love them. We're going to start with a half a cup of melted butter, which is 1 stick of butter. I'm going to add this in here. Grab a spatula to scrape out any of my butter. And then we're going to add in a cup of pumpkin puree, which I'm pretty sure is going to be the end of my my can here. We used this the other day for some pumpkin recipe. Pumpkin scones, there we go. I made a lot of pumpkin recipes recently. So I used about, I have about a cup left. So I'm going to actually scoop this all in here for this. Because you can always give or take a couple tablespoons. That's not going to impact the recipe so much. But you want a cup of pumpkin puree, and you can definitely use homemade pumpkin puree from roasted pumpkin. You just need to add a little bit of liquid to it when you roast up your pumpkin because the roasting process dries it out, and so it's much denser. So you will need to get it to the right consistency if you use fresh. So we've got a cup of our pumpkin, and then we're going to use a half a cup of our sourdough discard. Here we go. And it can be active or ready to discard. So mine's a bit active because I fed it up this morning so I can make some more sourdough loaves. But it's okay if yours is also not active because we're not using it for the leavening process, really just to kind of get rid of some. But they make the muffins so moist and tender. Okay. Before we mix this in, let's go give our lamb a quick stir here. So we're going to flip it over, kind of coat all of our lamb meat up in those spices. There we go. And then we'll let them saute. And then I'm going to take them out while they're still pink in the middle. I want them kind of cooked to a medium rare right now because we'll pop them back in our soup towards the end, but that's going to help keep them nice and tender.
Yeah, question. What can you substitute the sourdough discard with?
So you can always make a mixture of flour and water and kind of get that half consistency. I find it's going to be like not like a half a cup of flour, a little less than a half a cup. So not a third cup, but a little bit more. And then about a third cup of water, mix it together to where you have a half cup base for it. I've been making these recipes with the sourdough discard forever, so I'd have to look back. But I do have a couple recipes that don't have sourdough discard in it, but these have become a family favorite. And so I make these over my older loaf that I used to make all the time. So we're going to give this a mix. We've got our pumpkin, our discard, and our butter mixing together. So it's nice and fluffy. We're going to add in 2 eggs. So 1 and 2. And then we're also going to add in a whole cup of brown sugar. This is where our sweetness is going to come from, and that brown sugar is just going to be absolutely wonderful in our muffins. It adds a nice little molassesy flavor to it. Just pairs really well. This is a half cup measuring cup, so I'm going to use 2 scoops of it to get me to a cup. There we go. And we're going to stir the egg and our sugars into our mixture here. And as that sugar starts to kind of hit that pumpkin puree, it's going to make it a bit more soupy because it will start to dissolve. There we go. We will add our flour in last because when we go to add our flour in, we want to minimize the amount of mixing we do so that we get a nice fluffy loaf at the end. Let's add in our spices. So we're going to go, I'm going to see how much pumpkin pie spice I have because you need a whole tablespoon. But if I don't have enough to make it, I'm going to just substitute in some cinnamon, ginger, cloves to make up the rest. So I'm just a little bit shy. So normally I would use a whole tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice, but pumpkin pie spice is easily can be made at home using basic spices. So I need about, half a teaspoon more. So what I'm going to add in is about a teaspoon or half a teaspoon of cinnamon with a smidge of ginger and a smidge of cloves. So I'm going to add in, I would say, a third of a half of a teaspoon of ginger. And don't put too much in because it's got a bit of a kick to it.
I have a question. Do you recommend buying a starter kit or trying to make it from scratch or on your own?
I find, same thing with a third of a half teaspoon of this. I make my starter from scratch. It's not that difficult. You actually kind of go through the exact same processes as with a starter kit because we're getting a dehydrated starter to begin with. And then you have to feed it with flour and water, which is the exact same thing you do when you make your own starter. And I have both recipe cards that I have available for everybody, as well as videos on how you can make your very own starter. It takes about a week for it to ferment to get to the right temperature or like the right fermentation process for baking your loaf of bread. But it is not difficult. It takes about 5 minutes every single day to get it going there. And then you should be able to make a bread at the end of the week. And I also have a recipe card and videos on how you can make your very first sourdough bread because it is a very different process than a yeast bread. Because you don't do kneads, you do stretches and folds, and there's a lot longer of a proofing period. But it's easy. It's just something that takes max 20 to 30 minutes, but it's spread out over 24 hours. But it is very easy. And I just recommend diving in and doing it yourself. You don't need to buy the kit. Now, I will say there are things that can help you, like a sour bread kit, not the starter kit, but making sure you have the Banneton baskets and a jar for your starter. Those things are definitely easier. And I do have all of that in my Amazon storefront, all the stuff that I use. And I will say they have a starter kit, which is all your beginning tools. And that is very, very helpful instead of trying to piecemeal it with some of the stuff you have together. Okay, I pulled out my lamb here that we just sauteed up with just a little bit, cooked it so it's still going to be a little bit pink inside. And before we finish up our mini loaves, I'm going to start sauteing my onions up. And we'll toss these in here with those lamb drippings, which will just make them absolutely lovely. So I've got one yellow onion here. We're going to peel off. I always like to peel off kind of that first 2 layers of skin so I'm not working too hard to just get that top, chewy wrapper off. And we're just going to do a smaller dice on here for this. Doesn't have to be, a mince, but we don't have to go too big either. So you just got nice little onion pieces that will add so much flavor to the broth of our soup, but not necessarily be like, wow, that's a huge chunk of onion. There we go. There's that one little wrapper. And then I'm just going to toss this in here with the fat drippings from bits of the lamb, as well as the residual oil and those spices. We'll give it a quick stir. And then I'm going to just saute these onions over a medium-low heat. I'm going to do it right about a 4 because Dutch ovens really allow you to retain your heat well. I'm going to give this a nice stir. And I will say it smells lovely. I can really smell that sage and rosemary. Okay, since I touched the onions and onions are strong flavor, let me just rinse off some of that onion juice. And let's get working on our spices in here. So we added in what is essentially a tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice. So I'm just going to mix that in. Then we're going to add in about, let's do our baking soda first before I get my thing wet. We're going to add in a whole teaspoon of baking soda. This is going to be our leavening agent, so not the sourdough. This with the eggs is what's going to cause our mini loaves to pop. So a whole teaspoon of baking soda. And then we're going to add in a half a teaspoon of salt. Here we go. And now we're going to do our vanilla extract. We are going to add in a whole tablespoon of vanilla extract. And this is going to add just a lovely flavor to our pumpkin loaf that will just mesh really well with the pumpkin like spices and whatnot. Here we go. Mix all of this in, and then we'll add in our flour.
You have a question? Do you use sea salt?
This is the pink Himalayan salt. I love it. It's pretty in there. But I kind of just have, whatever I buy from the store, that's what I have. Sometimes it's sea salt, sometimes it's the pink Himalayan salt, and whatnot. I do like the flavor of pink Himalayan salt. There's my dog. I swear. He's a puppy. He's not really that old, but he acts like an old man. We're going to add in a cup of all-purpose flour. And we're going to just gently mix this together until it's all incorporated. But we don't want to over mix it because over mixing is going to lead to a stiffer loaf versus a nice and fluffy loaf.
What could you use instead of cinnamon?
So with cinnamon, that is really a kind of a key flavor in here because the cinnamon's also in the pumpkin pie spice. So you could make a mixture using ginger, cloves, a little bit of nutmeg, but cinnamon is kind of like a key spice. So that's like a strong flavor, but if you don't like it or you're allergic to it, you could use cloves and a little bit of ginger to it. That's going to give you a slightly different flavor. It's going to feel more like a mulled, like cider, it's got that more like Christmassy flavor to it. Okay, we've got this mixed up. I'm just making sure I don't have any big clumps of flour. But again, you want kind of a thicker, lumpier batter to this. And it's going to be thicker than using an oil base because of the butter. Let me spray. But before we do that, let's give our onions a quick stir over here. And I'm just going to pop in a smidge more olive oil, like a teaspoon. And there we go. Because I do want them to have enough on there to kind of heat up. Now I'm doing mini loaves because I love the mini loaves. They cook up faster. I feel like they stay moist there. We're going to spray them down so they come out easily. And I will say, so with a big loaf, you can definitely do this in a big loaf pan. You could also do these in muffins. But with the big loaves, you have to bake them longer. And I have found that when you bake something longer, the outside tends to get drier until you get the middle cooked all the way through. So I love the mini loaves because I feel like it prevents it from getting too dried out. We're going to start by coming in here with a scoop in each one, and then we'll come back and even them all out.
About how many onions do you think you go through in a week?
Oh, a lot. I buy from Costco. If I do the Costco shopping for the week, I buy 2 of their big bags there, and we go through that about every week. But I'm going to say it's like 15 to 20. I think I go through 2 onions a day about, unless I make like a French onion soup or something that uses a lot more. And the crazy thing, Loki Bruni, the crazy thing about onions is they're really expensive. You don't realize that because most of the time you're only buying a couple at a time, but you pay per pound and they're not as cheap as you think. I remember one time and I was like, going through and I bought it and I realized I bought like 4 onions, but I spent almost like $18 on 4 onions. And I was like, gosh, how are these onions that expensive? Could have bought steaks. But I will say they add wonderful flavor to it. I also use other things that have similar onion flavors to it. So I love green onions, which are an onion. So I use a lot of that. Leeks also add this nice onion flavor to dishes as well. And although celery is not an onion, it also adds that nice aromatic flavor to a lot of dishes. So I'm getting a lot of stuff from kind of the same families that are just delicious. Okay, I'm going to go through and kind of finish up with the rest of our mixture here. I do not like to let any go to waste, especially because yesterday we had like the HVAC people here, doing our little tune up on our AC/heater unit because we're getting into the fall where we're going to need our heat soon. And you know how they give you this just long window. I'll be here between 12 and 4, and they're never here until like the last hour of the window, and then they take forever. So we didn't do our lunchtime stream there, which means we didn't have a baked good. And it was funny how my kids all grumbled yesterday that there was not a baked good when they came home. And I'm like, you guys are obviously too privileged here that we're grumbling because I didn't make a baked good. And they're like, but there's nothing left. We ate all the scones already and all the cookies. And I was like, we'll survive. Based on how they acted, it's hard to tell if they survived or not. Okay, let's shake these out to even them. And then we're going to sprinkle some of them with pumpkin seeds. Now, I do know that my cameraman is deathly afraid of pumpkin seeds, so I will make sure some of them remain off. I love pumpkin seeds so much so when my kids were little, you go to Starbucks, and we go to Starbucks too much, but they didn't like the pumpkin seed crust in the beginning of the pumpkin loaf. So I'd always be like, let me eat the pumpkin seeds off for you. Well, now they've wised up, and the pumpkin seeds, they love them, and I'm sad because I love them as well.
You have a question? How was Jack's party?
It was great. He had so much fun. We definitely had a jealous teddy bear. Didn't quite understand why Jack was getting all of these toys that he also very much likes. But I think he's realizing that he gets to play with all of them except this one tractor. Jack got this little like little Tykes, kind of like a tractor with a wheelbarrow behind it that you like a pedal cart type thing that he rolls around. He does not let anybody use it. If they even look at it, he's like, mine. And he goes over there and gets on it just so nobody can use it. But the rest of the stuff he's been sharing well. So I've got pumpkin seeds on 4 of them. I made sure 4 were unpumpkin seeded for my husband and my one child who doesn't like them. But all the rest have this. We're going to bake these for about 20 minutes at 350. I'm going to do 20 minutes and 30 seconds because they take a little bit, maybe a little bit more. And now let's finish up working on our stew. And we've got our melts. And then we'll check on our pumpkin loaves here in just a second. Okay, let's give these onions a nice quick stir. We're going to toss in a little bit of garlic here, some garlic. Now, I sometimes use the peeled whole garlic, and I sometimes just use the garlic. This is just going in a stew where the garlic isn't a huge component, but it adds a nice complexity. So I'm going to add in about a teaspoon, and we're just going to saute it up. But unless garlic's a star, then my garlic is going to suffice. If garlic's the star of the show, like in a shrimp scampi or, a roasted garlic whatnot dish, then I'll use fresh garlic. But let's be practical. I don't need to spend the time to peel or dice all the time when a little spoonful of that will be perfect. We're going to add in our celery. I've got 5 stalks. They're kind of short stalks of celery. So these will be close to about 4 full-size stalks. If you're using the full-size stalks, keep the leaves and mince them up as well. They are wonderful. Add a nice kind of light flavor to the broth as well as a little bit of greenery. I'm going to cut each one of my stalks down the middle in half, and then we'll give them a nice chop. That way I don't have super big, pieces of celery, but more smaller notes that will get tender faster. But also allows you to get multiple veggies in every bite when we're eating our stew. Here we go. And we'll add this in. We'll let this saute up with our garlic and our onions, and then we're going to work on peeling our carrots and dicing those up as well. Beautiful. And I will say that celery adds a lovely note to the broth and the stew that just makes it wonderful. Even if you don't like celery per se, to eat, if you leave your celery in big chunks that you can fish out later, they will add this lovely flavor to your broth that you can't just replicate without it. There we go. So I've got 4 carrots, although some of these are pretty thin. So about 3 good-sized carrots. We're going to give them a quick peel, get this kind of dry, earthier outer layer off. And then I'm going to halve or quarter some of my bigger ones, and then we'll dice these up into nice smaller chunks. I don't want them too large because I want them to cook up faster, because this is like what I like to say is like a 30-minute stew instead of like the ones that you need to let cook for longer. And I like them smaller because it does allow you to get more veggies in every bite, more complexity in your flavor for it. So I'm going to take off the bottoms and the tops here. And then these 3 little itty bitties, I'm going to start kind of just chopping them. They don't need to be halved because they're pretty small. But I will, once we get nice and fat parts, I'm going to cut them in half. Again, just keeping it small. Carrots are a firm veggie, so they do take a lot longer to cook. So when you make them smaller, you cut your cooking time down. There we go. And then this guy is pretty big. And then this guy's even fatter, so I'm going to quarter him. And I'm just trying to keep all of my carrot pieces roughly the same size so that they will all get tender around the same time. You don't want to have too much size variation because then when you'll cook it, you'll either get some that are overcooked or others that are under. Let's give this a nice stir. I'm going to mix that in, and then we're going to prep up our potatoes and our mushrooms, and then we'll season it up. We'll let that start cooking in its broth, and we'll work on our little pastrami melts. Just make sure when you kind of scrape along the bottom of your pan so you don't get anything like sticking on or coating it. We will deglaze it when we add in our broth. I've got some little red potatoes here, which are a great potato to do in a soup because they hold their forms. Yukons are also great. While I do love a good russet potato, I find russets do not work well in soup unless you're doing a blended soup because they don't hold their form well. They're not as waxy, which means they disintegrate over time instead of keeping that nice shape. You also don't need to peel them. The red skins on these are fairly tender, so they're not like a russet where you have a firmer, chewier skin as it cooks. And we're going to just dice these up into nice smaller pieces so that they'll cook up pretty quickly. And got one more. This guy is a no bueno. There we go. Much better. You never know. Never judge a potato by its outside. Sometimes it will look pretty and you cut in and you realize it's rotten. It always reminds me, and I know this might date me, but if anybody read the Berenstain Bears books when they were kids, there was this one that I don't know if it was, can't remember exactly what the title was, but Mama Bear was showing Sister Bear about an apple, and she was saying, look, this apple looks beautiful on the outside, but when you cut it open, it's all wormy. And that's what it is. I said with vegetables, they can look funky on the outside and be perfect, and vice versa. They can look beautiful, but they've been dropped or thrown, as Jack likes to do with my avocado sometime if I don't watch him. Okay, let's get these. I'm going to turn it up to about a 6 right now so it can saute. And then we're going to dice up some or slice up some mushrooms to add into our soup. This is a pretty big guy, so I'm actually going to cut him down the middle so he's not, their mushroom slices aren't quite as big. And then we're going to use a little bit of tomato paste and some spices, and we're going to make a lovely kind of almost like a mirepoix. We kind of have that with our carrots and onions and celery in there. But we're going to bring our blends in there before we add in our broth to really make this a stew-like consistency and flavor. And I think this might be good. I don't think I need all the mushrooms that I set out. Now you could use a white button mushroom as well. I love Baby Bella's because their flavor, I feel like, is just a little bit more earthier. I wouldn't waste a really high quality mushroom on this dish.
How was the ravioli last night?
It was delicious. And it was so funny. Teddy had to have all of the bats. So I had to fish through the pot and make sure I got him all the bat ravioli. He didn't want anybody else to get a bat, which was funny. And I'm like, they're all the same. But it was delicious. We had just a small container left over for my parents, so they didn't have to go without. Okay, let's add our mushrooms in here. We're going to let this saute up for just a second. And then we'll start adding in some of our spices. Okay. While that's sitting there, I'm going to bring my tray over here and we can start prepping our stuff for our grilled cheese or our melt here. Let me check the timing. Oh, good. We still have a good amount of time on there. Okay, so I'm going to open up. I have my sourdough bread that we baked up from last night. So we ate a good portion of it, a little over half. But we're going to make our little sandwiches using it. It's still very, very soft, which is wonderful. And we're going to use pastrami. I've got a little bit of sauerkraut, my secret ingredient. I know it's not super bougie. Chick-fil-A sauce. Trust me, it just works.
You have a question? What's in the oven?
We have some mini pumpkin loaves in the oven. So they are sourdough pumpkin loaves with half of them with a pumpkin seed top on it. But think about your quintessential fall pumpkin bread. That's what we have in there. They are a favorite in the family. So everyone, they'll be happy. We went to the pumpkin patch over the weekend. And my son about broke my heart because he told me that this is the pumpkin patch we go to every year. We've gone to every single year since kids have been alive. He told me that he likes the pumpkin patch pumpkin bread better than mine. And I was just like, a little heartbroken here. And I was like, maybe I just won't make you pumpkin bread anymore. And I was like, and I'm pretty sure it's like this church that makes them up. And it's always like a, whatever the profits go to that's what they have at the pumpkin patch. And they sell this every single year. And every year we always go and buy like 4 pumpkin loaves. We get, because they just eat it while we walk around the pumpkin patch. And it just broke my heart. And I was like, my pumpkin bread is delicious. And he goes, yours is good, but I don't know. Maybe it's the pumpkin patch, but there's something about their pumpkin bread. I called him a traitor. And maybe he won't get one of my pumpkin loaves today. I'll just eat it in front of him and tell him how good it is, and he can go back to the pumpkin patch. Okay, we've got our bread here. I'm kind of just going to make sure I have 2 good flat sides. We're going to spread some butter on it. But before we get to this part, let's give our soup a little bit of a stir. Now that we've got a good saute on all of our veggies, I'm going to add in our spices and our tomato paste, and then we'll add in our broth. So we're going to add in a little bit of black pepper, about a half a teaspoon, because we already have some seasoning up the meat.
You got asked if you make any vegetarian meals. I said not with me around, but
yes. Now, not strictly vegetarian meals. I do make a lot of vegetable sides or whatnot, and I do make, I will say, like butternut squash soups, some soups that are vegetarian, just because that's just like this type of soup they are, but not strictly. But I do have butternut squash soup out there. You could technically leave out the lamb and make this just a veggie stew. But my husband is like 9/10 carnivore. My children eat better than him. He's a very picky eater. He'd be content with just steak with a side of bacon.
You have a question? Do you plan on doing any lives the week of Thanksgiving?
I'm not 100% sure what we will get to during Thanksgiving. If we can get them in, I will. But my Thanksgiving gets pretty crazy. Almost all of my siblings come in town. So all of my full siblings come in town. I have 6 full siblings, and then I have 3 half siblings. So they all come in town, and it's like 30 plus people. And I do a lot of cooking over at my parents' house because everybody, I have most of them stay there, and then I have 2 of my siblings stay here at our house since I only live a couple miles apart. We're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of sage. We added in about a half a teaspoon of rosemary. So we will try to get some in if our schedule allows it, but most of the time it is just we're all together and chaos ensues. You know, got to get a pickleball tournament in and just, hanging out, playing lots of board games. And when I say lots of board games, lots of board games people have never heard of that you don't even know how to play, but you're going to play them anyways. Okay, we've got our spices in here. I put 2 bay leaves in there as well. Let's add in our tomato paste. And we're going to stir that up, and then we can start adding in our broth. I also got to figure out, I know that weekend right before Thanksgiving, I am going to be out of town. We have a soccer game, and I want to say like Columbus, Ohio. So far away. And I'm like, oh, right before the weekend. Fun. We're going to add in about a big heaping tablespoon and a half of our tomato paste. This is going to add a great acidity to our stew. It's also going to help thicken up the broth for it, which just makes it absolutely lovely. We're going to let these kind of heat in there and cook together for a few minutes, like 30 seconds to a minute before we add in our broth. Or we're going to add some flour and then our broth. But let's get our sandwiches going. Let me grab some soft butter here. We're going to rub just a little bit of butter on the outside of each slice of bread, although I realize I need to trim this slice of bread up and make it even because that is not even. There we go. I said it would never melt. My cheese would never get melted on that side. I didn't. There we go. And then let's do a little bit of butter on this one. And you just need it on the parts of your bread that are going to be touching the skillet so they get that nice kind of crispy edge on it. Okay. We're going to start with our havarti cheese. Now, when I make like pastrami or corned beef sandwich or even with salami, any seasoned meat, I like to use a more mild cheese. I start turning this on around a 5 because I don't want the cheese to compete with the seasoned flavors of the meat because then I feel like too much is going on. So I like to use a more mild cheese like a havarti or a Gouda.
Do you ever use mayonnaise instead of butter?
I have done mayonnaise before, and I will say if I have to cook for a really, really big crowd, mayonnaise works really well for like if I have to make like 50 grilled cheese sandwiches. but I do like the flavor of butter just a little bit better. But mayonnaise is a great, like, come to. Okay, before we get to the next part of that, I'm going to stir up our thing here. I'm going to turn this down to about a 4, and we're going to sprinkle about a tablespoon of flour over the top of this and coat it in. We don't need much, but this is going to help give us a really rich broth for our soup. So we're going to add in just about a tablespoon. Maybe do a little smidge more. There we go. And before we mix it, we're also going to add in about a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. And this is going to add a whole depth of flavor to our broth, a little bit of acidity that is just fabulous. Let's coat this up. And then we're going to slowly add in our broth, which I'm actually going to be using water with some beef broth and some vegetable bouillon. So a little bit of both. We're going to start by adding in a cup. And then you're going to slowly mix it around and let all of this kind of incorporate together. Here we go. And then we'll slowly add in the rest, but we don't need to add it all in at one time. Oops. Because I find that what you do is it's like you're flooding it and you don't get a chance for everything to kind of thicken up and work together. So we will add it in just little by little. I always like to say cup by cup, step by step. Add in another cup. And this is a great way, especially if, you don't want to add too much liquid in there so you don't have the right consistency of your broth. And same, so adding it in slower allows it to kind of turn out perfectly every time. And then we'll add our meat back in here in just a second once it comes to a boil. But it's already primarily cooked through, so we don't need to add it towards the very end so it doesn't get tough. Here we go. Looking fabulous. So we're going to add that last bit in. So that was 4 cups of water. And then we're going to do a mixture of some vegetable bouillon and some beef bouillon. And both of these are going to add just kind of great flavors to it. I know we're not using a beef in here. We're using lamb, but you could actually use beef in this with this stew. But I find that the combination of these two really work well. So kind of a big heaping spoonful of the vegetable bouillon. That's going to be like a teaspoon and a half because we're aiming for about a tablespoon. And then kind of the same of our beef. And luckily that's going to be the end of this jar. I think I have a little scoop there. This is going to add the saltiness to our stew as well, so we won't need to add any extra like soup or salt to it, but it will add that flavor. And I find you could also do all vegetable broth, but I find that little touch of that beef just adds a nice, really nice note to it. Beautiful. So we're going to let that sit there. I think we've got about a minute or two. Yep, almost there. There we go. I dropped a little bit of water. Let's check on these. These are starting to heat up. Let's add in our pastrami, a little bit of our sauerkraut, our Chick-fil-A sauce, and then we'll grab our loaves, that mini loaves out of the oven.
What's the difference between soup and stew?
Soup is going to have a thinner broth, and stew is going to have a thicker base to it. Stew is typically, it's been cooked even longer, and that's kind of what thickens it up because it's kind of those vegetables kind of disintegrating and forming a thicker base to it. But yeah, it's essentially like the same thing. It's just kind of the texture. Okay, let's go check on there. I'm going to wash my hands real quick. And let's check on our mini pumpkin loaves. We'll see if they're ready to come out. So I always like to give them a little bit of a tap. If they're nice and firm at the top, I think these need maybe a little minute or two longer. The pumpkin seed ones need a little, we're going to rotate them first because the back of my oven gets hotter than the front. And then I'm going to set my timer for 1 minute because, You don't want to take them out if they're not done yet, because what will happen is if they're not firm at the top, if you take them out, they will stay puffed, and then about 5 minutes later, they'll dimple in, and then you'll have a very moist base to it. So always check them, and I always err on putting them in for less time than too much time, because you can always add more time. Let's add our sauerkraut. You can also use diced up like some pickle slices on here as well to get this nice acidic flavor. It kind of pairs well with the seasoned pastrami. I don't put a crazy amount of sauerkraut on here, just enough to get the flavor, but not enough to feel like you're eating like a jar of it. Just a small amount, almost like a little bit of relish on a hot dog. And then we're, of course, got to do our little drizzle of our Chick-fil-A sauce. You can't go too crazy. You want to put it right on top of our sauce so that it's ready there. We'll put our next layer of our cheese on, and then we'll go check on our mini loaves and pull those out because it is calling us. Let's get these kind of going. I also try to make sure when I'm making my grilled cheeses, try not to have your cheese drape over the sides of your bread, or they will just kind of melt down on your skillet and burn. Let's see. Perfect. We'll flip those in just a second, but let's go grab our mini loaves out of the oven because they should be ready. And they don't take much longer. It is literally like a minute or so. Got it. I need to give these a good, perfect. It just needed that little extra time to get the nice little poof on them. So here are our gorgeous pumpkin mini loaves. So we have some with seeded, just kind of like at Starbucks, and then some plain for the non-believers. And we'll let them cool. After about 5 minutes, these should pop out of our loaf pans really, really easily. If you try to get them out while they're still hot, like super hot, they're going to stick and fall apart. You also don't want to wait until they're completely cold because they will also stick and fall. So you got to get them out when they're warm. Let's flip our cheese, our grilled or sourdough melts over. Now, I always do kind of a double toasting on it. We'll do our first side is really to heat up the bread, melt the butter, get the cheese warm. And then the second time on each side is to crisp it up to get that perfect golden crispy deliciousness. Okay, let's check out our stew here. Give it a nice stir. We're going to add in our lamb here in just a second. But I'm going to give this a quick taste and see how it is. See if we need to add anything else to this.
Do you ever add wine to stews?
Mm-hmm. I find wine is delicious. Red wine, like a rich one, adds a lot of great complexity to a stew with it. But today I actually...
Did you say great or great?
Funny. He's a comedian, guys. But today I use the tomato paste, which is going to add that acidity that red wine can do to it, as well as the Worcestershire sauce, which has a bit of a vinegar base to it. And those two add this nice acidity. You could also add in a red wine or a burgundy would also be really great with this one. So I do, especially with different pot roasts. So I have a different things, like if I'm making a beef bourguignon, I will definitely use it. Okay, we're going to add our lamb in here in just 1 second. But I feel like I'm hearing the beautiful sizzle over here. So let's get it over, flip them over. And now we're going to do our final kind of crisping up on each side here. And move it over. And we'll get them nice and golden brown. We're going to add our lamb in with all of our little juicy bits into our stew. So any of that residual juice that has come out, pour that into your stew. That's going to add great flavor.
What's the best meat substitute for lamb?
You could definitely use beef, like a chuck roast would be wonderful in this to use as well. Those flavor profiles work really well together in there. And that's what I would say. Like, I wouldn't outside of, you've got the beef, bison. The problem with, I love bison, but it is a very tough meat, especially if it gets overcooked. So I only like to do bison. Either I can do it in a burger if I mix it with like a higher fat meat, or if I do it in a slow cooker where it can turn to shredded beef, but like shredded bison, those are really good. We're going to chop up some of our green onions to throw into our soup. There we go. And I'm going to mince this up. This is going to add a nice fresh onion note to our stew, which I find is really lovely. So we've got a lot of just nice flavors that are coming together here. I'm going to mince these up just a little bit more because we've got a couple big ones in here. And then we'll toss these in just a second. I'm going to let that lamb stew together in here for just a second. But you can see we've got this kind of a nice, it's not a super thick, it's not a bisque, but it's a much thicker kind of base to our stew. Here we go. Let's flip our sandwiches over because I think, beautiful. We've got this nice kind of toasty, perfect kind of brownness going to it. And we'll give this a good rotation. Beautiful. Let's get our green onions in. Then I will get our plate down and get ready to serve because our melt should be ready in a minute or two. Okay, so we're going to sprinkle all of our green onion in and give it a quick stir. I always say your green onion is kind of like your finishing herb. Just like if you were to throw parsley or whatnot on it, don't put it in too soon because it can wilt over time and lose its texture and its flavor. So I always like to put it in right before I serve it.
What could you use instead of flour to thicken the stew?
So it's going to be a slightly different process. So we added in our flour in before we added in our broth. If you're going to use a different substitute, add in your broth, and then what you're going to do is you're going to ladle out some of your liquid after you've mixed it all together, and you're going to make a slurry by mixing cornstarch and your liquid together, about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of cornstarch into that warm liquid, that hot liquid, and then you're going to put that liquid back into your soup, and that will thicken it up. You can't just scoop the cornstarch in here because what will happen is the cornstarch will congeal into balls and you'll have like little cornstarch dumplings. And you don't want that. Beautiful. Perfect. So we've got, turn these guys off, turn this off, and let's get ready for our lunch. Okay. Let's see, I'll slide this over here. We'll make a little room for this, and then I'll flip my cutting board over so I can cut my sandwich in half because it's quite large. I will say these sandwiches make about, they feed like 2.
Do you ever make a white chicken chili?
I do have a great white chicken chili. I have actually made this chicken chili since I was in middle school, and it is delicious. And I typically make it once or twice in the fall for it. Okay, we've got our, before we serve it up, let me grab our ladle because I got to scoop out our soup. But I know I wasn't thinking about it because I've been kind of craving a little bit of a chili recently. And every year at not 4th of July, at the Super Bowl, I make my famous chili, which is not white chili, but it's won several like awards. It won a guitar, like a Gibson guitar one year. So it's pretty proud of it. It's won in 3 different states. So pretty proud of my chili. But I do have a really good white chicken chili. Okay, let's start. We've got our pastrami with our havarti on our sourdough bread. We've got nice kind of golden brown crispy bread. It's nice and toasty hot. Secret ingredient is you add a little bit of Chick-fil-A sauce to kind of cut through the acidity of the sauerkraut, and it is just fabulous. And then we have our lovely lamb stew that is filled with celery, onions, carrots, potatoes. And then we made a lovely kind of stew broth using tomato paste and vegetable bouillon and beef bouillon for this lovely stew. And then, of course, let's not forget our perfect little pumpkin loaves that are delicious. They taste like fall. It's just like a pumpkin bread, but mini and delicious. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So we've got our lamb stew and our pastrami melts and our pumpkin mini loaves, and you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my knives, my pans, my cutting boards. I have my sourdough like baking kit and starting things, because somebody was talking about sourdough, but all the things that you need to create like your first loaves, I have those in there as well. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.